As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
One of 1,000 working stiffs. Until I wasn't no more.
While The Irishman stands on its own as a powerful, meaningful film, I think its full significance is felt within its context to Martin Scorsese's earlier movies.
See where we are?
The Irishman has thematic and stylistic overlap with everything from Taxi Driver to Raging Bull to Casino.
Is it? What are those odds?
But in this video, I want to focus specifically on the ways The Irishman builds on elements of Goodfellas and what we can learn about The Irishman by comparing how similar scenes and techniques are used in both films. Thanks to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Go to mubi.com/ThomasFlight to get your extended free trial. Let's start at the beginning with The Irishman's opening scene. This long Steadicam tracking shot is undeniably reminiscent of two shots from Goodfellas. First, this very famous tracking shot. And this slightly less famous perspective tracking shot.
And then there was Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy, and his guys, Frankie the Wop.
In The Irishman, the camera's movements and the music act as callbacks to these shots from Goodfellas.
And Mikey Francesi.
But the differences here are where the thematic significance lies. While this shot elevates the life of gangsters to something epic, energetic, and sweeping, this shot is searching, wandering, and empty. The camera is slower, it's less steady, it almost hobbles its way to its destination, the main character and our narrator in a wheelchair. While this shot from Goodfellas invokes the community of mob life,
And you had Nicky Eyes.
What's up, guy?
this shot searches for a familiar face and finds none. In Goodfellas, Scorsese is using these tracking shots to give us a cinematic view of a gangster in his prime, reaping all the benefits that come with his lifestyle. By using the same technique to illustrate a gangster alone at the end of his life, Scorsese is drawing extra attention to the emptiness and fleeting nature of those benefits, and to the different perspective that The Irishman will be taking on its subject matter. This opening shot sets up The Irishman as something distinct from Goodfellas. How truly different it is won't be clear for almost another 3 hours of the film, but this start strongly indicates to the audience they're stepping onto a different kind of ride. Another stylistic technique that Scorsese uses in both films is the freeze frame. In Goodfellas, the freeze frames are used to help construct Henry's personal mythology around himself and the people he knew.
See, Jimmy was one of the most feared guys in the city. He was first locked up at 11, and he was doing hits for mob bosses when he was 16.
In The Irishman, the freeze frames are used to introduce characters, but they come with the addition of a title card telling us how the character died.
He took care of everything from Philadelphia to Atlantic City. That I know.
There's an emphasis on death and past tense, even in the character introductions. It's a shift in narrative perspective, from Henry's in Goodfellas as someone who still idolizes the lifestyle and the mythos.
For us, to live any other way was nuts.
To Frank's in The Irishman, someone who's alone, reminiscing at the end of his life.
But that's another thing I don't want to get into now.
After all these people have died. The structure of both films is built around a penultimate sequence that precedes an epilogue. In both films, these scenes cover the events of a single day closely. But stylistically, Scorsese approaches these scenes very differently.
We're going to take a ride up to Port Clinton today.
Where the scene in Goodfellas is frantic, filled with cocaine, paranoia, intense music, and fast edits, this scene in The Irishman is calm, deliberate, and quiet. This time, instead of using a similar stylistic choice to draw attention to the connection between different scenes across the two films, he uses a different stylistic approach to emphasize the difference between two scenes that have a similar structure. And this is where the audience can begin to feel the full weight of how the perspective shifts between the films. In Goodfellas, this scene is the climax of a combination of music, editing, and voiceover that have given the film so much of its energy. In The Irishman, all of these things fall away, and we're left with a stark view of the events that are taking place. There's a visual mirroring between Jimmy Hoffa's final moments and Tommy's in Goodfellas. Each movie ends with a betrayal, but again the differences are stark. While Henry is on the side being betrayed in Goodfellas, in The Irishman, Frank is the one betraying. If you line the two films up, it's not an accident that Goodfellas ends right about where The Irishman's final act kicks off, because The Irishman's final act extends thematically beyond where Goodfellas ends. The Irishman is the gangster film stripped of its youth, of anything that glorifies the life. In Goodfellas, Henry has lived the life he always wanted to live and escapes relatively unscathed. In The Irishman, Frank gets his life, but that's almost all he gets. There's a link between the ending of Goodfellas and the beginning of The Irishman. At the end of Goodfellas, Henry, who has been narrating for the entire time, speaks his narration directly to the audience.
And then I'd either blow the winnings in a week or go to the Sharks to pay back the bookies. Didn't matter. Didn't mean anything.
This moment contextualizes the film and the narration as a sort of confession from the witness stand. In The Irishman, there's a similar moment, but it happens at the beginning of the film.
I'm a business agent for Teamster Local 107 out of South Philly. One of 1,000 working stiffs. Until I wasn't no more.
I think this is a deliberate choice that signifies that The Irishman is picking up where Goodfellas left off thematically. Henry confesses to the audience, but he does so to save his own skin. In The Irishman, Frank's confession to the audience is not an attempt to save himself from the law or from getting whacked.
It's over. They're all gone.
It's an attempt to save his soul.
Frank, do you want to pray with me again?
Yeah.
Henry gets redeemed in the eyes of the law, but it's a sort of false redemption. His only regret is that he had to give up the life.
I'm an average nobody. Get to live the rest of my life like a schnook.
Whether Frank can find true redemption, or if that's even possible, is the larger spiritual question Scorsese asks at the end of The Irishman. Martin Scorsese has recently been very vocal about how cinema is changing. A lot of great art films are losing their space in theaters and are moving on to streaming services. Moviecom is one of the great streaming services that is giving these kinds of art films a home. They have a hand-curated collection of 30 films at a time. You get access to a new film every day. They have great art house films, international cinema, exclusives, and festival picks. One of the things I love about Mubi is that every movie they put in their catalog comes with a brief explanation of why they chose that film. It's a great way to discover something new and interesting that you wouldn't see anywhere else. And you can try it now for free for 30 days when you go to mubi.com/ThomasFlight. Check it out at mubi.com/ThomasFlight. Thank you so much for watching. Special thank you to my Patreon supporters. Go to patreon.com/ThomasFlight to find out how you can support my channel.